Well, our research team spent a year looking at the way local government is functioning, talking to the stakeholders, surveying the community, and basically we identified three main issues, three main areas of concern when it comes to government at the local level of the town or city. One of them, and perhaps this is the most important one, is that we need to enable citizens, ordinary people, to take more responsibility. As co-authors of their civic lives, they need to be able to determine what kinds of services and facilities they need, and also, think about how they can contribute in those areas, how they can become involved. A second area we looked at was how to create a public service, and public servants who are able to actually support citizens in what they want and need. Now this should perhaps happen in a more down-to-earth and less bureaucratic way than we've seen in the past. I'm talking about moving towards a more customer-directed approach across the board. Finally, we need to look at the relationships between national government, local government, and citizens, because that has not been functioning as it should. We've had over-directive centralism, and a kind of mistrust has emerged between national and local bodies, and it's the citizens who bear the brunt of this. Well, what I want to focus on now is climate change, more specifically on the fact that climate change is a result of human activities. Now there has been some disagreement regarding the extent to which human activity can be blamed for climate change, but I want to argue that there is evidence which clearly demonstrates that our own actions really are causing a genuine threat. The available evidence seems to indicate fairly conclusively that land and sea temperatures started to increase around 200 years ago. So, what's the significance of this? Well, 200 years ago roughly coincides with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the Northern Hemisphere. In other words, this was when our production of harmful gases really got going as a result of increased industrialization. Since that time our production of gases has accelerated due to the fact that not only has industry grown in size but it has also now spread to the Southern Hemisphere, indeed, most parts of the world. So, in the last 200 years, as industry has grown we can see a gradual rise in the temperatures which, to my mind is sufficient proof of the damaging effect of our actions and needless to say it's an issue which we need to address. The earliest writers on politics, and I'm thinking of Plato and Aristotle here, felt free to draw insights from all areas of human knowledge, unlike modern academic writers who tend to put things into smaller and smaller compartments, or focus more closely on one area of inquiry. For example, Plato would examine a whole political system and the philosophy that underlies it, whereas modern writers on politics might concentrate on one particular institution in that system, the House of Lords in England, or on voting patterns within a country. With this focus, the bigger questions that the ancients dealt with, what is the best form of government? Or what is justice? Tend to get left behind. Many writers on politics these days are university-based and so have to have specialized interests, and while they may make new and interesting discoveries in their special field, it is at the loss of a broader perspective, not to mention the loss of a general audience or readership. In the 19th century, there were still writers who used the same freedom of inquiry as the ancients, and are all the more readable and relevant because of it. We hope to have something meaningful to say in our next book about the efficacy of advertising. This is a huge question that impacts everything from commerce to politics to journalism. But for now, let me give one example. My kids were recently watching a Yankees-Red Sox day game on TV, broadcast on the S Network. One of the commercials was an anti-smoking ad placed, I believe, by the city of New York. It was a grit documentary-style spot, featuring a surgeon talking to the camera, then showing the patient he was about to operate on. The patient was a man whose toes were blackened and rotting away. The image of the foot was extremely disgusting. "It's gangrene," the surgeon said, and then he drew on the man's leg with a marker to show where he was about to take his hacksaw and cut off the leg. The ad made a huge impression on my 5-year-old daughter. Hours later, she asked out of the blue, "Are you still thinking about that boy's foot?" She couldn't eat dinner that night since she was still thinking about the disgusting image. She is definitely more scared of seeing that foot again than she is of seeing the Wicked Witch of the West again. The loss of construction jobs by immigrants from Latin America contributed to a spike in unemployment among all Latino workers to 6.5%, compared with 4.7% unemployment for non-Latino workers, the report found. As recently as late 2006, Latino workers had achieved their historic low unemployment rate of 4.9%, based mainly on a job boom among immigrants, the report said. To put it bluntly, Hispanics had a rough time in the labor market in 2007, said Rakesh Kochar, the author of the report, who is Associate Director for Research at the Pew Center, a nonpartisan organization in Washington. Job loss was particularly severe for Mexican immigrants, whose unemployment rate rose to 8.4% from 5.5% in 2007, the report found. Of 247,000 jobs lost by Latino workers in the construction industry in 2007, workers born in Mexico lost 152,000 jobs, or about 60%. Latino workers make up about 14% of the United States labor force, and about 52% of them are immigrants. After years of fretting over coming shortages, the country is actually facing a dwindling number of young people entering engineering and technology-related fields. The decline is growing so drastic that industry has begun advertising campaigns intended to make engineering look cool, and companies are slowly starting to import foreign workers, or sending jobs to where the engineers are, in Vietnam and India. It was engineering prowess that lifted this nation from post-war defeat to economic superpower. But according to educators, executives and young Japanese themselves, the young here are behaving more like Americans, choosing better paying fields like finance and medicine, or more purely creative careers, like the arts, rather than following their salaryman fathers into the unglamorous world of manufacturing. The problem did not catch Japan by surprise. The first signs of declining interest among the young in science and engineering appeared almost 2 decades ago. I'd like you to think for a moment about your hands and all the things you can do with them. You can use them to write or to drive. You can thread a needle, play the drums, build a wall, and so on and so forth. They can be careful and precise, think of someone doing eye surgery, for example. But they can also generate huge forces. And here you might think of the sportsperson throwing a discus or lifting a heavy weight. How is it possible for our hands to be so incredibly flexible? Well, it's all down to the extraordinary complexity of the bones, ligaments, nerves and muscles that lie beneath the skin of our hands. There are, for example, 9 muscles alone controlling just one thumb. Some of these are anchored to bones within the hand, while others link to the arm. It is claimed, by neuroscientists among others, that speaking 2 or more languages increases cognitive abilities and in some way rewires the brain, as it were, in a way that positively affects how the brain works. And it's true that we tend to think of people who can speak 2 or more languages as being bright. Learning a language is, anyway, good mental exercise, not to mention its benefits in introducing you to other peoples and cultures. This is why all school curricula should include at least one compulsory language. Anyone who knows 2 languages will find in certain circumstances, they compete for position, the vocabulary of one getting in the way of the other. Often bi or multilingual people find one language more suitable for expressing certain kinds of thoughts or feelings. There is another view on being bilingual, not from a neuroscientist, but from someone whose business involves words and language. Brought up in a bilingual home, speaking Greek and French, and also fluent in English, she is old enough to remember when her native language, Greek, was also in effect 2 languages. There was the formal, correct form, katharoiasa, which was taught and spoken in schools, written in newspapers and books, and so on, and the everyday demotic language you used with your friends. As for her view on bilingualism, she says that you end up with a split personality.
I don't understand road rage. It is a problem that is getting worse all over the world. People are turning into monsters when they get behind the wheel of a car. They think the road belongs to them. They think they don't have to follow speed limits or consider other drivers. I wonder why this is. What is it about cars and driving that turns normal people into maniacs? Some people simply hoot and shake their fists. The funny thing is that they also do the same things to make other drivers angry. Serious road rage happens when someone gets out of their car and gets angry. They can punch the other driver and sometimes even kill them. Why would you want to kill someone because they overtook you?
Try to get a baby to smile? It can seem close to impossible, and then suddenly there it is, that elusive, seemingly joyous grin. Well, it turns out those smiles aren't spontaneous, they're strategic. Researchers have found that when babies smile, it's for a reason. They want whoever they're interacting with, typically a parent, to smile back. And they time it just so, a smile here and a smile there. The researchers call it sophisticated timing. The study is in the journal PLOS One. The researchers enlisted real mothers and infants and quantified their interactions, which fell into 4 categories. 1. Babies wanted to maximize the amount of time smiling at their mothers. 2. They wanted to maximize the time the mothers smiled at them. 3. They wanted to experience simultaneous smiling. And 4. No smiling at all. By studying when smiles happened and what the subsequent effect was, the investigators were able to figure out that for mothers the goal 70% of the time was to be smiling simultaneously, while for babies 80% of the time they just wanted their mother smiling at them. So, mothers want the interaction, while babies just want to be smiled at. So your baby may not be able to feed itself, talk, or even turn over yet. It's Friday the 13th. You've got to ask yourself a question: do I feel lucky? If you don't, you could be suffering from triskaidekaphobia. That's a fear of the number 13. Napoleon, Herbert Hoover, and FDR are well documented. But why do folks think 13 is unlucky? Particularly when it falls on a Friday, as it will 3 times this year? The University of Delaware's Thomas Fernsler is known as Dr. 13. He's an expert on the number's bad reputation, which may date back to biblical times. After all, the 13th guest at the Last Supper was Judas. And you know how that worked out for Jesus, who was crucified on a Friday. Other factoids from Fernsler: the first person to die in a car accident was killed in New York City on September the 13th in 1899, although that was a Wednesday. And the ill-fated flight of Apollo 13 launched at the 13th minute of the 13th hour Central Standard Time on April 11, 1970. And the numerals in the date April 11, 1970 add up to 13. As long as you don't include the 19 and 1970. Hey, sometimes superstition can be hard work. Today, some tall buildings lack a 13th floor. Well, they have a 13th floor, but they call it the 14th floor. Because the purveyors of bad luck are apparently easily fooled. Meanwhile, over in France, panicky Parisian party throwers can even hire Aquatortium, a professional 14th guest. Free campus tour runs daily during summer for prospective students. I think it's one of the best things I've done, really. Building trust is not something that can be achieved overnight. Certain scientific principles must be learned verbally or by a logical deduction.